Hello everyone, welcome to Move Well, Live Well. We get a number of people coming in here with issues regarding their low back. And what they're complaining of is they have problems with their low back. What's happening with these folks, they're complaining of when I stand for any period of time, my low back, it just feels uncomfortable and tight, and I can't stand for that long. I have to sit down because of if I stand for too long, my back just starts to hurt, and then I just have to sit down. I can't stand for any amount of length of time, even longer, even 5 minutes. 5 minutes of standing, and they have to find a way to sit. Well, like we've said before, we live in a world where we sit way too much. So now what's happened to these folks is that they're starting to become their chair, literally. They're starting to become that point where their body is conforming to that chair. Now, there's a condition, and over time what's happening to these folks, there's a condition that's happening to them. It's called lower cross syndrome. You can look it up. And essentially, lower cross syndrome is if I go side view here, let me put this down. If I go into a side view here, the abdominals right here have become weak, and then the glutes right here have become weak. So there's your first line. So from here to here, this is weak and the abdominals are weak. And what's happened with lower cross syndrome, the low back has tightened up. See, it has tightened up, and the hip flexors, the muscles here in the front, because we sit, again, like we're talking about, we sit way too much. So then when these folks go to stand, they can't quite get that upright position. So then their back, you can see my back here, it's relatively flat. And then if these guys are tight, as I go to stand up, to compensate for me not leaning forward like that, my low back has to extend. So you see dudes, you see people walking around like this, right? They're walking around, their belly's all hanging out like this, right? Their belly's all weak, the abdominals are weak, their glutes aren't engaged, they're also weak, but then these hip flexors, right here, these guys are super tight, and then the low back has to tighten as well, and then they walk around like this, right? Now I'm exaggerating, but yeah, you see folks like this. They no longer can stand upright. They no longer have that ability to do that. Why? They've become their chair. Literally, if I sit down, it's like this, see? So it's like I'm sitting in a chair all the time, and these guys have become so tight, the low back has to do this. And now you walk around like this. So, I got Mr. Spine here to kind of demonstrate what's going on with these folks. So, this is you without any skin. This is the back of your head right here, and this is your tailbone right here. This is the sacrum, okay? These are your ilium. This is your pelvis, right? Ilium. The ischium is down here on the bottom, your sitting bones, and the pubis is in the front. Right here, this is pubis. So, this is your pelvis. So what's happened with these folks, since the muscles in the front, right in through here, have tightened, they push everything forward. So what happens here, it does this. Yeah? And look what happens to the tailbone. You can kind of see the tailbone here. It comes backward. And you see the lumbar spine, all the joints in your lumbar spine jam up. Yeah? See? So here it straightens out. Right? If these guys are tight in the front, they pull the pelvis forward. Huh? And then the tailbone ends up sticking outward, and then the low back has to compensate for tightening up, so that way you don't walk around like this, right? You don't walk around like this. There's people that walk around as they have to use a walker simply because they can't stand up anymore. They have to use a walker. These are so tight they have to use a walker to keep that lean forward. They become their chair. So you look, my leg is that. It's so tight, they become their chair. But those people that don't choose to do a walker, they have to tighten here to stay upright. And they walk around like this. And 1 to 2 minutes, 5 minutes, walking around like that, man, I mean, just doing that right now makes my back sore. So, how do you fix that? How do you fix these tight hip flexors? We already talked about in some previous videos the psoas, so check out some of the mobilization and stretches for some of the psoas, iliopsoas muscle. And we talked a little bit about the rectus abdominis, even tight abdominals, because the abdominals get tight, that brings you forward too. And, you know, kind of has a tendency to keep this like this, right? Tight abdominals. So there's a way to kind of help stretch that in previous videos. But the one I'm going to show you here, we're going to go on the floor here in just a second. I'm going to show you a great way to release the rectus femoris. It's one of the quad muscles, you know, the quadriceps, the muscles of the front of the thigh, right? You have the rectus femoris being one of them. And that is a big hip flexor. It tightens up and through there. And to some extent, since we sit, sometimes, let me move this down a little bit so you can kind of see. When we sit, sometimes if we're sitting, I'm pretending to sit, we do this. So the TFL, or the tensor fascia lata muscle, which is, it helps to actually bring your thigh this way, but it also internally rotates the femur. So just doing this, sitting like this, with kind of like a knock knee, if you will also tighten the TFL. So those two muscle group, those two muscles, the rectus femoris and the TFL, they get tight, and then we do this, right? And then we have to walk around like this. So how do we fix that? In just a second, I'm going to show you a thing that you can use to help with that tightness in the hip flexors. And we're back. Here we are on the floor, and we were just talking about in the previous portion of this video how since we sit way too much, here I am sitting, these muscles here in the front, these hip flexor muscles, have really become tight, and now we're becoming the chair. So how do you release this stuff? How do you release this rectus femoris? Sure, you can do quadriceps stretches, but remember, the rectus femoris crosses the knee and the hip joint. So we need to be able to release that. Also, we were talking about the TFL, the tensor fascia lata muscle, which is an abductor. It brings the thigh here and outward. But when we sit, gotta see here, when we sit, sometimes we sit kind of in this position, so it internally rotates the femur, and that gets tight too. So how do you release that? Well, you grab your handy dandy foam roller. And what I kind of like to do is I like to, right here, if I'm going to release this, let's do the right side so that way you guys can see. If I'm going to release this right side of my upper thigh here and the TFL and that rectus femoris up top here, I like to kind of get toward the edge, the left edge, if you will. If this is the left and this is the right of the foam roller, I like to get right here on this part. So now my this other leg can drop and kind of control the pressure I put on that rectus femoris and TFL. And I can kind of rotate, search around and find those tight areas. And when you find a spot, hang out there a little bit. Don't just sit there and roll. You can even, don't just, vigorously roll over it like this. You really want to get in there slowly and deliberately, find that spot and just slowly oscillate back and forth like this over it. See that? A lot of people, when they do foam roll, they have a tendency to just, haphazardly roll over it like it's a big massage or something. But really, you're just trying to get in here and find those areas and then really get that sucker to release here by deliberately going over those areas. See right there, there's a tight spot for me. And then you can even challenge it more too. You can even go into knee flexion to challenge that area. And again, you're using this other leg over here, the left one, to kind of guide the right one. And I can rotate a little bit to search and find those spots. Like right there, that's my getting into the TFL right there. That's a really good one right there. And so you can also go into the quad too. Remember, the rectus femoris spans the entire quad, the knee and the hip joint. Let's go over here so that way to do this so it's closer. So let's go this way. So again, I'm using the distal end. That end is over there. This allows my right leg to be free, and it's not encumbered by the foam roller. And I can be in here. This is my left thigh now, the front part of my left thigh. That right there. And again, search around for those spots. Right there. You can really feel it through there. And then just oscillate back and forth, just gently on there. Again, this is to your tolerance. You don't want to sit here in agony. At first, these may be very, very sensitive. So you're going to use the opposite leg to kind of push yourself off the foam roll if you can't put all your weight on it yet. Over time, you'll be able to put your weight on it, and it won't be as sensitive. And you can, again, search around, and if you rotate a little bit, you can find more spots right in there. That's a good one. Woo. And again, the rectus femoris, right now I'm kind of into the TFL, that tensor fascia lata muscle. If you really want to get the rectus, you're going to have to move the foam roller down a little bit more. Remember, the rectus femoris spans both the knee and the hip joint. And I usually tell folks to start distally. So distal, like by your knee, and then work your way up. And you can feel a lot of junk going on in there. Again, use the opposite knee to kind of keep your weight off if it's too sensitive for you. And then work your way up. Again, when you find a spot, stay there for a while. Don't just sit here and roll back and forth. You really want to find a spot and get that area to relax, to loosen up and release that tension, and then move up a little bit more and a little bit more. And then when you find a tender spot too, you can oscillate a little bit back and forth on that spot. So again, what's the foam roller doing? Over time, we talk about this in a lot of videos, that these muscles, they become tightened, they become shortened over a long period of time. And the layers of those muscles, you have the skin, the adipose tissue, the fascia, and the muscle tissue itself have become pancaked together, kind of like a grilled cheese sandwich, if you will. At one time, those layers were actually 3 separate layers when you talk about the bread, the cheese, and the bread. But over time, those layers have become adhered to because of lack of motion. We sit way too much. And those layers have become pancaked together, grilled cheese sandwich together. So this, you can kind of see it here. Oh. If this is my muscle tissue, it now can, see that? Can bend across the foam roller. See that? And this is a great, effective tool. Now, don't get me wrong, stretching is good too. But to really get down deep, you really need to use something like this, or even a lacrosse ball. But I usually recommend, since these are pretty tender on a lot of folks, because we sit way too much, start off with the foam roller. And if you want to get something more and more specific, move on to the lacrosse ball. So anyway, if you have any questions with this video, obviously drop them off in the comments section below. If you have any questions with lower cross syndrome, there's some other stuff that needs to be addressed, obviously, in lower cross syndrome, because we didn't really talk about the weak abdominals and the weak glutes. This is just a video to explain how to release those tight hip flexors. And by releasing those tight hip flexors, the rectus femoris, the psoas, if you haven't seen our how to release the psoas video, go there. And even the tensor fasciae lata muscle, because remember, it abducts but also internally rotates the femur, and that gets tight too. So how to release those two with this. And if you need another video to talk about how to release the lumbar extensors, go to the lumbar portion playlist, and there's a great video on how to stretch out or release the lumbar extensors. That way, for goodness sake, you can stand for longer than a minute or two without discomfort in your low back. Anyway, we thank you for watching. We appreciate it. Give us a thumbs up. It lets us know you care, and share with others so that way they can benefit from these videos too. And don't forget to subscribe. And when you hit subscribe, make sure you hit that bell notifications button so that way you don't miss any videos coming here in the near future. Again, we thank you. We appreciate it. We'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.